I have made it clear that I will not support this nomination, and there is a good reason for not supporting him, Mr. Chairman. The White House really does not have a good record when it comes to this seat. Back in February, I voiced my opposition to Mr. Delaney, Michael Delaney, who was nominated for this very same seat. Well, Mr. Delaney, we found out, had used hardball tactics against a 15-year-old survivor of sexual assault. He did this in order to protect an elite private school that wanted to cover up the disgusting conduct that had been perpetrated against this young woman. Now, Mr. Delaney threatened to name, to shame, and to humiliate her by removing her anonymity if she had the audacity to come forward and tell her story. Now, fortunately, at least one of my Democratic colleagues had the moral clarity to join us in sinking Mr. Delaney's nomination. Now, after the Delaney debacle, you would think that the White House would have learned their lesson. And I thought they would have the decency to nominate someone who actually had a track record of protecting women and children, and it seems I was wrong. The president has chosen to nominate someone very similar to Mr. Delaney and his disregard for the well-being of children, and that is Seth Aframe. And I recently spoke on the Senate floor about this nomination, so I'd like to walk my colleagues through the two cases that Mr. Aframe prosecuted that automatically, in my opinion, automatically disqualify him from service on the federal bench. Now, in each of these two cases, Mr. Aframe recommended sentences far lower than the guidelines for heinous, unimaginable crimes against children. One of the defendants was guilty of unconscionable acts of sexual violence against a 14-year-old girl with a hearing impairment. This precious child was kidnapped. She was taken to an abandoned motel in Vermont, and she was raped. Despite all of this, despite what happened to this child, Mr. Aframe, as the prosecutor in this case, recommended a sentence far below the probation officer's suggested guidelines. It is clear that Mr. Aframe wanted a low sentence. And let me read you why. And these are his words. He wrote, and I'm quoting, "This low sentence will incapacitate the defendant until he is in his 60s. Hopefully, by that time, the danger that the defendant presents will have subsided." End quote. Mr. Chairman, that is repulsive. It is disgusting. And you have a 14-year-old girl that was hearing impaired that was forced to go through this rape and this sexual violence with a man, and then you've got a judge who says, well, maybe by the time he's in his 60s, he will not want to do that anymore. That is disqualifying from someone to sit on the federal bench. What is a woman? What is a girl? What are they going to think when they go before this man? Now, the other case that I want to bring up, the defendant in the other case had created 6 videos of himself sexually abusing a 3-year-old girl, 3 years old. Now, many of us are parents and grandparents. I want you to think about this. Think about a 3-year-old girl being sexually abused, not once, not twice, not 3, not 4, not 5, 6 different times. 6. Think about this. This is a 3-year-old toddler. How many of you have 3-year-olds in your lives? I do. To me, this is repulsive. So let's talk about the sentence in this case. Well, Mr. Aframe decided he was going to recommend 60 years, but what was the sentencing guideline on this? It was life in prison. If he had given him life in prison, he wasn't going anywhere. He was locked up. 60 years, well, maybe the guy can get probation. So Mr. Aframe himself noted in the sentencing memo that he was asking for something lower than life in prison. When I pressed Mr. Aframe about this under oath, on why he refused to recommend life in prison, he misrepresented the facts. So let me again set the record straight. The sentencing memo that Mr. Aframe wrote himself stated that the guidelines recommend a sentence of life in prison for raping this child. That, Mr. Chairman, is a fact. Regardless of what your staff is whispering in your ears, that is a fact. So I am going to ask my Democratic colleagues to join me in voting no on Seth Aframe. The man is morally unfit to sit on the federal bench.
Ms. Chairman, may I speak on this?